It would be nice if we could be doing this in person because it's a whole lot more fun. Because I can give out free passes to the History Center as well, but all of that's kind of put on hold with COVID. The discussion tonight is a hockey night in Pittsburgh. My name's Larry Woods. I'm a docent and volunteer at the Senator John Heinz History Center. And we do programs on all sorts of different topics. This is just one of the topics that we do as an outreach into the community. And we have a wonderful exhibition, which I'll talk about at the end in our sports museum, which is part of the History Center, dedicated to hockey. But where I want to start is not with the Penguins, but actually where hockey first started here in Pittsburgh. And it started quite a while ago. So back in 1895, in Schenley Park, where, if you know the city of Pittsburgh and where the University of Pittsburgh sits, and now Carnegie Mellon, and the Schenley Bridge, which leads you up. It's a beautiful into the area. It's a beautiful area. And during the 1890s, it was the height of the gorgeous buildings, the large structures, the Carnegie Library, the Carnegie Music Hall. It was then called Carnegie Tech was being built, and they were these large brick buildings, ornate and very structurally complex. And if you look at the picture that you see here in the upper left, this was called the Schenley Park Casino. Now, casino was not a gambling place, but it was a place for entertainment. And it was spectacular. If you look at the size of those buildings, there were 40 Palladium buildings, 18 feet tall, 6 feet wide. There were mahogany on the interior. And what made this particularly compelling is the picture on the lower right, which is the interior of the first floor, which had an ice surface. And this is 1895, don't forget. And the ice was made by ammonia, which was under pressure. Now, there were 1,500 incandescent light bulbs. Now, put that in perspective, in 1893, at the World's Fair in Chicago, Westinghouse put the first incandescent lights into a large-scale building. They won the contract. They beat out Edison with its Edison lights, and using DC, instead of DC current, they were using AC current. And in the White City, the exhibition in Chicago in 1893, they used over 1 million light bulbs. This was the first time anything like that was done on that kind of a scale. So in Pittsburgh, just 2 years later, using the same technology, you had over 1,500 incandescent light bulbs in this building to light it. They had to do certain things to try to keep the ice from melting because it would get too warm. But they overcame all those things and had this absolutely spectacular structure. It was right across from the Phipps Conservatory. So that puts it into context of where it was located. Now, the balcony was 840 feet in length, and it could accommodate 1,200 people. And it also looked down 20 feet below onto the surface where the ice was at. And on December 30th, 1895, the Pittsburgh Press wrote that a great international hockey and polo tournament was held at the casino. A team of 10 Queen's University players, and the Queen's players were from Canada, met a group of local skaters from Western University and Holy Ghost in a half-an-hour exhibition of hockey that was played before the polo match. Now, when you think about that, Western University is now the University of Pittsburgh. Holy Ghost is now Duquesne University. Queen's College came out of Canada, and they played hockey in Pittsburgh for the very first time. The game that they used to play before that was ice polo. And basically, it's what we call deck hockey today. It was played with sticks, and it was played with a round ball. Well, The press further went on and said, before 9 o'clock, the boys lined up and gave an exhibition of hockey. This game was never before seen in Pittsburgh, and it was a revelation. The casino players, in truth, didn't know what to do with a little flat puck used in hockey. They didn't know whether it was good to eat or whether it was a holiday toy. No account was kept of the score, but the crowd marveled at the work of the visitors. The paper noted that between 2,500 and 3,000 people showed up despite bad weather. There had been a big snowstorm that night. Well, this was a revelation because the players from the local colleges in Pittsburgh were playing ice polo. And when they started playing with a flat puck, it was a revelation because it made controlling the puck much easier and the game itself was much more interesting. So they abandoned polo and hockey became the game that everybody played here in Pittsburgh. They had public skating sessions were held only on weekends, and for a 5-cent admission, it included steel skate frames that were strapped on over a person's shoes. So it was like the old roller skates for those of us of a certain age that will remember that you would strap over top of your shoes in order to roller skate. This was the same with ice skates. Now this marvelous stadium would have been around today because Phipps Conservatory was built 6 months earlier and it's still there. The Carnegie Museum and the Carnegie Library likewise were still there. However, a disaster struck. After 18 months, there was a fire that broke out because of the ammonia, which was keeping the ice cold. And at that point, what ended up happening is it exploded, and they said that there was enough flames and debris that it shot hundreds of feet above the park all the way down to the Shenley Bridge. So you could imagine the destruction. So this magnificent structure lasted all of 18 months before it finally was destroyed. Now the Duquesne Gardens was built, it was a former trolley barn, trolleys being streetcars, and that's where they used to refurbish them. That building, which was on 5th and Craig in Oakland, opened up in 1895, and it started to open for public skating in 1899. So they began using this venue for both ice hockey and ice skating. I once did a presentation, and a young lady probably in her 90s who had gone to Margaret Morrison College, part of Carnegie Mellon University now, said that they used to go over and ice skate on the weekends over at Duquesne Gardens when she was going to school. So it was used all the way up to 1856. The Pittsburgh Athletic Club and Western University, University of Pittsburgh, started playing hockey in this area, and they began playing hockey all the way until 1956, as I said, in this venue. Now, in 1901, a well-known hockey player from Canada was visiting Pittsburgh. His name was Arthur Sixsmith, and he thought that there were enough interest in hockey that this would be a great place to really lay down his roots, which he did. He met with the Duquesne Gardens owner by the name of Arthur McSwiggan, and Sixsmith started the first hockey league, which was the Western Pennsylvania Hockey League, in 1901 and 1902. It was considered the first professional hockey in the world. And the reason is they started to actually pay for players to play. In Canada, it was considered just amateur, but in Pittsburgh, they actually paid for the players on their own. The first hockey league team to win the championship in 1901. This is a picture of the Western League team. The one that I really love is because they were actually getting paid to play were the Pittsburgh Bankers in 1907 and 1908. Notice their jerseys. It's got a dollar sign on the front of them. And I thought, what a great jersey to wear. But this is where professional hockey actually started in Pittsburgh. Now, hockey was a little different back then. And Ann Mataras, who's the director of the Sports Museum, as well as director of our curatorial services at the History Center, best described hockey in those early days as rough and tumble. And she said there was almost a mini riot during one of the games, citing a newspaper article that followed. It talked about the players having to fight their way off the ice and the crowds jumping on the ice and players having to fight their way to the locker room. Police cleared the ice, and then the players had to fight their way to the hotel. There were 23 penalties of the Pittsburgh team alone. So it shows you that in those early days, it was definitely rough and tumble. Now consider, as I said, where this is located. This is in the Oakland area and of Pittsburgh, out near where the universities are. In 1905, Frederick Ingersoll built this complex, the first of 50 Luna Parks around the country, and Pittsburgh had the first one. Luna Park was an amusement park, 2 blocks from Craig Street. It was on 1905 Craig, just 2 blocks from Duquesne Gardens. It had a Ferris wheel, shoot the chutes, a dance hall, picnic pavilions, a concert shell, carousels, bumper cars, and wild animals. It also had an incubator where they had newborn babies who were, it would be what would now be considered at Children's Hospital, the NICU, which is the intensive care. But they actually had a stainless steel area where those children were there and they were actually on display. If you can imagine, the people would come and see how those kids were being taken care of. But that was part of what was considered Luna Park back then. Now, one disaster that did strike in 1907, someone forgot to lock one of the gates and a lion escaped from the animal enclosure and it mauled a 55-year-old woman. But a Pittsburgh City police officer shot the lion and the woman survived. But Luna Park lasted in Pittsburgh for about 4 years. Now at the Point, we also had another venue that was built. And this got built in 1889 through 1951. And this was called the Winter Garden. There were 3 structures. Again, notice how elaborate they were. One was called Machinery Hall. The other was called the Winter Garden and the Music Hall. Now, there was a fire originally and 2 of the buildings burned. They were quickly rebuilt and they put ice into the Winter Garden. The ice ended up being used for a variety of hockey, as well as at the Duquesne Gardens. And the first women's league was played here at the Winter Garden. Now, the whole reason for this was it was a Pittsburgh Expo. Remember in 1893, you had the World's Fair in Chicago. Well, this became a wonderful place where Pittsburgh became a hub of where entertainment would end up being shown. It was directly across the river from Exhibition Park, which the Pittsburgh Pirates, then called the Pittsburgh Alleghenies, were playing Major League Baseball. And here, in the opening of the, in 1889, when they opened this complex, one of the first people to play music at the music hall was John Philip Sousa. So had you been around back then, you could have listened to John Philip Sousa as he played some of his marches in Pittsburgh. This was so successful, over 10,000 people a day would flock to the Point. This stayed until 1920, when they stopped playing hockey. The property was used as an auto pond for the city of Pittsburgh. The music hall was demolished in 1941. Machinery Hall was demolished in 1942 for scrap metal for World War II. And in 1951, the main hall was the last hall to be torn down, and that's where we now have Point State Park. But before Point State Park, this was a venue that was highly regarded. Now, if anybody enjoys college hockey, the main player and the player that is awarded the trophy for being the best college hockey player of the year was named after this gentleman, Hobey Baker. Hobey Baker played for Princeton University. Now, the reason he ends up in our story is he played his last game of hockey in Pittsburgh. He had graduated and he was barnstorming with friends who had come to Pittsburgh, and they played an exhibition match. Hobey scored a hat trick. They ended up winning in overtime 3-2 against a team of players from Pittsburgh, from the University of Pittsburgh, Holy Ghost, and now Carnegie Mellon, then Carnegie Tech. After this game, it was the last game, he volunteered in World War I as a pilot. He ended up flying 3 missions, and on the 3rd mission, he ended up crashing and he died. So the last hockey match that the legendary Hobey Baker played was here in Pittsburgh. Now, a gentleman by the name of Roy Scully, excuse me, a former hockey referee who became the manager of both Duquesne Gardens and also an amateur and semi-pro hockey team called the Pittsburgh Yellow Jackets. Now, the Yellow Jackets were part of the U.S. Amateur Hockey Association, formed in 1915. And between 1915 and 1925, they played their games at the Duquesne Gardens. The Yellow Jackets colors were black and gold. They were the first team to be using black and gold as their colors here in Pittsburgh. Now, in 1924, going on to 25, they were having some problems with their finances, and they ended up selling the team. And we'll talk about that in a second. But while this was going on, hockey was going gangbusters, particularly in Pittsburgh. 1920 was when they had the first Olympic hockey team. Hockey had not been played in the Olympics until 1920. The Olympic team was selected here in Pittsburgh. They had a tournament. Players from all over the country came, and the team was selected here in Pittsburgh in 1920. They played a 3-game exhibition against the Canadian team, and the U.S. won 2 out of 3. However, when they went to the Olympics in 1920, they lost to Canada and ended up winning the silver medal. There were 7 nations that competed in that first Olympics: Belgium, Canada, Czechoslovakia, France, Sweden, Switzerland, and the United States. Now, one of the gentlemen that played for the U.S. hockey team is on the lower left, and that's Herb Drury. Herb Drury was actually a Canadian. They came to Pittsburgh in order to not only play hockey, but to get good jobs because of the Industrial Revolution. So Herb stayed and became a Yinzer. He became a U.S. citizen and ended up playing for the U.S. hockey team. This is a picture that was taken down at the History Center in our hockey exhibition, showing Herb in his uniform. And his silver medal is in the upper right-hand corner from the 1924 Olympics. He played in both Olympics. So you can see that if you come down to the History Center. But we have that long, rich history of hockey here in Pittsburgh long before we had the professional teams of today. As I said, in 1924, the team was having a little bit of financial difficulties, and Ray Scully ended up selling the team to James Callahan and William Dreyer, who knew that the NHL wanted to expand. They decided that the expansion would include cities like New York, Chicago, Detroit, Boston, the original 6, as they call it, plus the 2 Canadian teams. But also there were some other teams that played, namely Pittsburgh, St. Louis, Ottawa, and the Pittsburgh team was named the Pirates. The owners, Callahan and Dwyer, asked Barney Dreyfuss, who was the owner of the Pittsburgh Pirates, if it would be okay to use that name. Dreyfuss said, sure, use the name because we're only using it in baseball. You're playing a completely different sport. And for 5 years, we had a professional hockey team in Pittsburgh, an NHL team called the Pittsburgh Pirates. And notice their jerseys, black and gold. Now, the Pittsburgh Pirate baseball team, their colors were red, white, and blue. And they didn't change their colors until the 1940s, when they changed it to black and gold. When Art Rooney started his professional football team in Pittsburgh in 1933, they were called for the first 6 years the Pittsburgh Pirates. They did wear black and gold at that point, and then they changed their name to the Steelers. So you have the Pirates in hockey as the first team in Pittsburgh to wear black and gold, but ultimately all of our sports teams now wear black and gold. Now, the Pirates had a coach by the name of Odie Cleghorn. Odie was an innovator. In 1925, you didn't stop until the whistle blew, which meant that you could have extremely long shifts. And he decided that the players were getting tired. So as a competitive advantage, he thought, what if I started to send my players over the boards and exchange them while the play is still going on and just change them, quote, on the fly. And as we know it today, the line changes that exist all through hockey originated in Pittsburgh with Odie Cleghorn. Now, they played for 5 years. They were very competitive for 2 of those years. They didn't make it to the championship, but they did make it where they were extremely competitive. But in 1925, 1930 rather, financial difficulties struck and they went out of business, and the team moved to Philadelphia for 1 year as the Philadelphia Quakers, and then they ended up disbanding. Financial problems because of the crash of 29 hit a number of teams. Ottawa and St. Louis ended up losing their teams as well, and there were only 6 teams left, and they then became called the Original Six. But in reality, there were actually a lot more than just those 6 during that time period. Now, Ray Schooley ended up purchasing the team back in 1930 and ran it again as the Yellow Jackets as a amateur team up until 1935. And in 1935, he ended up with a second team, which were the Pittsburgh Shamrocks. And the Shamrocks played for only 1 year. And with the luck of the Irish, sometimes it's really good and sometimes it's the potato famine. And the Pittsburgh Shamrocks seem to have that bad luck because it was the year of the famous snowstorm in Pittsburgh, where there was an enormous snowstorm that ended up flooding the downtown area with 63 inches of snow and then almost 2 inches of rain. And the financial difficulties scuttled the team, and they went out of business as well. So the next iteration was to start the Pittsburgh Hornets. And this was played by John Harris, who purchased the Detroit Olympics and moved them to Pittsburgh and called them the Hornets. And they played in Pittsburgh from 1936 up until 1967. Now, Harris was interesting because he realized that hockey itself was not a big enough draw. So he thought, what if I hire a up-and-coming skater who has some recognition to skate before the games, to build attendance? And he did that, bringing in the skater Sonja Henie. Sonja Henie was an Olympic gold medalist. She ended up skating, and it started the Ice Capades. The Ice Capades began here in Pittsburgh, and they went on to great renown, and that's where all of the different ice shows that you see today got their start. So these are 2 of the flyers for the Ice Capades, Holiday on Ice, and Sonia Henne as their star. Now, the Civic Arena was built originally for the Civic Light Opera, not for hockey. And if you notice, I'm going to go back just here. There was a gap where 1956, where I said the Duquesne Gardens went out of business. They closed, and there was until 1961, the Hornets had to stay moribund. There was no team. They reconstituted themselves and played until 1967, and they played here in the Civic Arena from 61 to 67. This is my first taste of hockey. I was a senior in high school in 1965, went to the Civic Arena to watch the Hornets play, and absolutely got enthralled with the game of hockey. The skill of these 200-pound, 180-pound men on these little thin slivers of metal, skating down the ice, controlling the puck. It was almost ballet on ice, and it just totally caught my imagination, and I've been a hockey fan ever since. But this is where the Penguins got their start. In 1967, the NHL expanded from the 6 teams to 12 teams. They put 2 teams in California, the California Golden Seals, which didn't last very long, and the Los Angeles Kings. They put 2 teams in the Midwest, the Minnesota North Stars and the St. Louis Blues. And they put 2 teams in the East, the Philadelphia Flyers and the Pittsburgh Penguins. The Penguins were not an instant success. They got their name because the owner of the team saw the igloo, which was the nickname because of the shape of the Civic Arena, and thought that the name of the team should be the Penguins, and her husband thought it was a great idea. One of the promotions that the Penguins used back in that very, very early days was to have a penguin, live penguin, come out onto the ice and kind of waddle around. And his name was Penguin Pete. Somebody didn't do their homework, unfortunately, because the penguin that they selected was an African penguin, and it ended up catching pneumonia from the ice because it wasn't used to, it was a warm water penguin, not a Arctic penguin. And unfortunately, Penguin Pete died in 1968. So they had a taxidermist stuff it, and it was on display in the lobby of the Civic Arena until someone stole it. Now, ever since I've been doing these presentations, I've been asking if anybody knows where Penguin Pete is today. I think would like to have it back. So let me know if anybody knows where that stuffed penguin is at. Now, there were 7 players who played on the Hornets that ended up coming over and began playing with the Pittsburgh Penguins. And they were Andy Bathgate, Val Fontaine, Ab McDonald, Hank Bassin, John Daly, George Sullivan, and Leo Bovine. Some of these players today are in the Hall of Fame. Our first superstar was this gentleman, Michel Briere. He was a phenomenal player coming out of Quebec, Canada. He was so good that they gave him the number 21 in honor of Roberto Clemente and thought he would be the leader of the Penguins to take them into the playoffs and actually get us our first Stanley Cup. At this point in time, I was only able to follow the Penguins by following Stars and Stripes because I had already volunteered and was in the Air Force. So I followed where they were at until 1970, when Briere was in his first year, and the Penguins made the playoffs. They ended up playing the California Golden Seals, and they swept them with Briere scoring the winning goal in overtime in the 4th game to move them on to the finals of the Eastern Conference, which was against the St. Louis Blues. Now, in 1970, I was discharged and had enough money when I got out to see if I could get tickets to see them because I got home just in time for the series against the Blues. So in 1970, the Penguins played St. Louis, losing the first two games in St. Louis, but they won the next two games with me sitting up in peanut heaven watching my Penguins and Briere amaze everybody as we made it to the playoffs for the first time. Unfortunately, we lost game 6 and 7 and didn't make it back to the playoffs for quite a long time. We had another string of bad luck at this point because in the summer of 1970, Michel Briere was in a car accident, suffered traumatic brain damage, and passed away. And our hope of having that superstar that would lead us on to glory and victory kind of was dashed at that point. Now, we had a number of really, really good teams, although they just didn't make it very far. In the 69-70 team, as I said, we made it into the playoffs, but in the 70s and 80s, we had this line. My favorite player, Jean Pronovost, Syl Apps, and Lowell McDonald. They were called the bicentennial line. And that's because they scored between the three of them 200 points and 100 goals. And they did that for 5 straight years. But it wasn't good enough for us to make it into the finals and get into the finals of the Stanley Cups. But they were really quite good. And from the 70s and 80s, Pittsburgh was very competitive. However, things got bad, and we almost lost the team in 1976 when they filed for bankruptcy. We ended up getting this gentleman, and this is a life figure that we have down at the History Center. It's an exact replica, but this was Mario Lemieux, La Magnifique. We had played so badly, we got the first round of the draft and drafted Lemieux, and he came on board, and this is where we finally started to make our way into the big time. They started adding the pieces necessary in order to move forward and try to become a really competitive team. You'll notice the gentleman up in the upper left, Jaromir Jagr, Tom Barrasso, the goaltender, Rick Tocchet, and Ron Francis. These were the building blocks, along with Lemieux, that got Pittsburgh to move forward. But it took one more piece, and they added a former Stanley Cup winner for the New York Islanders, Bryan Trottier. He's in the lower center. But when they brought Trottier on board, he was already at the end of his career. And there were sports writers in the town that said, he's old, he's slow, and what are they doing bringing him in? What they didn't realize is that his experience and his ability to help forge the bond that's necessary for a championship team was something he was able to supply. And boy, was he successful. Because in 1991 and 1992, we were back-to-back Stanley Cup winners. And there's Bryan Trottier, particularly in the upper left-hand corner, lying on his back in front of the cup, winning 2 more cups for Pittsburgh. Now, Lemieux had lots of issues. You know the story probably about his bout with cancer and also his back, which caused him great pain and great difficulty throughout his career, which limited him. But even with his limitations, he became arguably one of the 5 best hockey players ever. And for those who aren't familiar with some of his highlights, I thought I'd go through just some of the ones that I think are the most significant. So in 1984, on his first shift, on his first shot, he scored a goal. Then in December of 1988, he did something that's nobody has ever done before, and they haven't done it since. He scored a goal 5 different ways: full strength, power play, shorthanded, empty net, and on a penalty shot. It's rare that you see an empty net goal, a penalty shot to begin with, but to be able to score five ways, 5 goals is a feat that no one has never accomplished before or since. Then in 1991, they won their first Stanley Cup. 92, the second cup. And then he was diagnosed with cancer, Hodgkin's lymphoma, and he began receiving radiation treatments. That was in January of 93. Radiation treatments usually last about a month, as did his. And in March 2nd, he returned after his last radiation treatment, the day of his last treatment against the Philadelphia Flyers, where he scored a goal and an assist. Now, the interesting story about this is when he finished his radiation treatment, the team had already left Pittsburgh and they were already flying to Philadelphia. He was insistent he was going to play that night. So the press department chartered a plane and got him on a plane and flew him after the team had already got to Philadelphia, so that he arrived in time to play and still scored a goal and an assist after receiving his last radiation treatment. Having had radiation treatments myself, I can tell you that's an accomplishment. Then in April of 97, he decided that he was going to retire because his back had been giving him so much trouble. Again, against the Flyers, he scored a goal and an assist in his last game. They waived all of the rules, and in November of 97, Mario Lemieux was inducted into the Hall of Fame. However, in 99, he decided he was going to purchase the team. Now, the story is that he was owed a substantial amount of money from the prior owners. However, he thought if he was ever going to get his money back, the only way he was going to do it is if he would buy the team himself and make it successful so that he could get his money back. Well, they had filed for bankruptcy that year. He ended up buying the team, and he did something that's really incredible. If you know anything about bankruptcy law, you pay pennies on the dollar to your creditors. It's the creditors that take it on the chin. Lemieux, however, wasn't going to stand for that. He insisted that every creditor that was part of that bankruptcy would be made whole 100%, down to the smallest vendor who sold things in the arena. Everyone received their funds. He knew that he hadn't been treated fairly when it came to his salary. He made sure that everybody was able to get made whole as a result of that bankruptcy. And the team has been highly successful ever since. December of 2020, he decided he was going to come back. So he had already retired 3 years earlier, but he returned and naturally scores a goal and 2 assists on his first game back. Then in 2006, after our next superstar had joined the team, he played with Sidney Crosby for half a year, and he decided that this time he was going to retire from good. And he has now, as a cup owner, won 3 additional Stanley Cups to have a total of 5. That, my friends, is a pretty good resume. So between 2000 and 2009, through the draft, they started to build the next dynasty. Marc-Andre Fleury came in 2003, Evgeny Malkin in 2004, Crosby and Letang in 2005, and they were called the core. They started to add to that core with Sergei Gonchar, Chris Kunitz, and again, that missing cog. And they brought in Bill Guerin. Now, Billy Guerin was a fascinating story as well. He had won a Stanley Cup with the Islanders as well. But when he came in, lo and behold, sports writers were saying, why are you bringing in this old, slow, over-the-hill hockey player? Well, it's because he was able to help to make this team gel into a winner. And in 2009, that year he was brought in, yes, in fact, they did win their 3rd Stanley Cup. So the Civic Arena, who had been around since 1967, ended up being relegated to the scrap heap, unfortunately. And PPG Paints Arena, Console Energy first, and now PPG Paints, ended up as the home of the Penguins, and that's where they play today. Beautiful arena, beautiful stadium. Outside is the famous statue of Mario Lemieux going through two Islanders. Rather famous play that was made into a beautiful statue. And between 2009 and 2016, they started to build again, because you can't stand on your laurels. So they started rebuilding this time, keeping the core, but building around them. The top line is what became known as the HBK line: Hagelin, Bonino, and Kessel. They were fast, they were active, and they scored goals. The bottom line, you had Daly, which was wonderful, and you had Matt Murray, who came in as the goaltender to play with Marc-Andre Fleury. And yet again, they needed that glue piece. This time they brought in again another older, slower player towards the end of his career. And that is a gentleman that they used to call Dad, and that's Matt Cullen. And it's my contention that Brian Trottier, Matt Cullen, and Bill Guerin are the reasons why the Penguins were able to win the Stanley Cups that they did. Those glue pieces that were added at the end of their season and into the playoff push made the difference and made this team competitive. 2016, this is the fourth Stanley Cup. They added a few more pieces going into to the next season, and they had, excuse me, Daly, who now is added to our front office as a defenseman. Gensel, who's now probably the best scorer on the team, added the additional pieces necessary. They still kept Matt Cullen as the glue piece, and we now have our fifth Stanley Cup. So what's the future for 2021? That is everybody's guess. There's still question marks on whether there's even going to be a season. The ownership and the players are still fighting over what time they should play, how they're going to do it, money issues. So the season itself is very much up in question. But if they do play, I can guarantee that the Penguins will be in the thick of it. Whether or not they make it to another cup or not is a question mark. But this is a team that stays resilient. Now, consider something interesting. In 1967, 6 teams entered the league in expansion. Of those 6 teams, the Flyers have won 2 Stanley Cups. The Los Angeles Kings have won 2 Stanley Cups. The St. Louis Blues just won their first Stanley Cup. The Pittsburgh Penguins won 5. We've been very, very fortunate in Pittsburgh. With the exception of the Montreal Canadiens, even those original 6 teams don't have as many Stanley Cups as the Penguins. So our superstar today, Sidney Crosby, just like Lemieux, I thought I'd go through some of his highlights. The only player under 18 to play for Team Canada in the 2003 juniors and recorded as the youngest player to score a goal. He collected 14 points in 2 World Junior Championships in 2004-2005. Had his first NHL point in 2005. Was Rookie of the Month in October of 2005 with 2 goals and 12 assists. Captain of the Stanley Cup winners 3 times. And these are just his other accomplishments. 2 gold medals in the Olympics, a World Championship, World Cup MVP, Conn Smythe twice, Prince of Wales, and you can see the rest of the accomplishments that he's made. He's still at the height of his game, and hopefully will be able to get us another Stanley Cup so that we can have 6. Now, you can't talk about the teams without at least mentioning the general managers and coaches. The first coach, Bob Badger Johnson, was a college coach out of Wisconsin who came to Pittsburgh and got the saying, "It's a great day for hockey," which was painted at center ice for years. Craig Patrick, who had worked with the famed uh, Miracle on Ice team with Herb Brooks as Herb Brooks' assistant, was the general manager. Badger Bob, unfortunately, had a brain aneurysm and died after the first Stanley Cup that he was there for. And Scotty Bowman, who had been an assistant and an advisor, took over for the second Stanley Cup during the Mario Lemieux years. Then Ray Shero, son of Fred Shero, who had been the general manager of the Flyers for many years, took over for the 09 team and had Dan Bylsma as the coach. And we won the Stanley Cup at that point. And then you have Sullivan and a rather short goaltender who played for Detroit and then for Pittsburgh, and that's Jim Rutherford. And we now have the 2 Stanley Cups with those gentlemen. This is a collection of front office that shows great deal of stability here in Pittsburgh. And we're very fortunate for that, just like the stability we have with the Steelers. Now, I thought I'd mention a little bit about the jerseys over the years. And you notice that we started off in '67 with that robin's egg blue uniform and white. And it wasn't until 1980 that we ended up with the black and gold. Now, the reason we ended up with black and gold in 1979, the Pittsburgh Steelers and the Pittsburgh Pirates both won world championships. Sports Illustrated cover had Willie Stargell and Terry Bradshaw on the cover, and Pittsburgh was called the City of Champions. The Penguins, with their blue uniforms, decided they'd better get in the bandwagon, and they decided they were going to change the colors to black and gold to be consistent in the city of Pittsburgh. When they went to the NHL to see if they could do that, the Boston Bruins said, "No, black and gold are our colors." The Pittsburgh Penguins said, "Wait a minute. Back in 1925, when the Pittsburgh Pirates were here, they had black and gold. The Boston Bruins were not black and gold. They were black and brown. They didn't change their color until black and gold until later. So they actually had brown and gold, not black and gold." The NHL considered it and said, "You can both keep your colors, but the Penguins can keep black and gold as well." And therefore, from 1980 on, although the variations of the type of uniform, we've been black and gold. So I mentioned in 25, the Pittsburgh Pirates had black and gold. The baseball team switched to black and gold. The football team also has black and gold. And we're the only city where all of our major franchises wear the same colors. So why black and gold? The flag of the city of Pittsburgh. The flag of the city of Pittsburgh is black and gold. But notice in the center, the blue and white checkerboard. That's the reason for the blue color of the original Penguins. It still stems from the flag of the city of Pittsburgh. Now, I also want to just mention the announcers. There were a number of announcers early on, including Bob Prince, Sam Nover, who had been sports director. They had all did some announcing, but Mike Lang, almost from the beginning, became the voice of the Pittsburgh Penguins. And he's been known for his famous sayings. And he always picks up these kind of sayings that he drops in during the course of the game when something happens. Get in the fast lane, grandma, because a bingo game's getting ready to start. And my favorite, which when we won our first Stanley Cup and they had the big celebration down at the point, the mayor of the city of Pittsburgh got up and took the microphone from Mike Lang. And if you remember at that point, that mayor was a short Jewish woman that had a voice that could peel paint off of a wall. It was gravelly, and she took the microphone and went, "Scratch my back with a hacksaw." This was before the internet, but they did have video, and it went viral across the country, and people wondered, who the heck is this woman? We all knew it was Sophie Maslov, our beloved mayor at that time, and she loved the Penguins. Now, Lang has been working his way out and is getting close to retirement. He only does mostly radio and not doing the road games any longer. Steve Mears is taking over, as well as Jeff Getzloff. Paul Steigerwald likewise worked with Lang for many years, and then he took over on the television side. But we've also had Bob Airy, who played on a Stanley Cup winning team, and Phil Bourque, who do the color commentary. And the gentleman on the right, Dan Potash, who all the players love to make fun of, and it's great fun because he has just such a great sense of humor. They've been able to have one of the most successful television and radio combinations in the country and within the NHL, and we consistently rank as one of the best markets in all of hockey. Now, I'd just like to mention that the History Center is open. You need to have a mask and be socially distanced. It's a very large facility. If you haven't been down to the History Center, I'd encourage you to go. But again, only socially distanced during this time of COVID. The Sports Museum is part of that complex. And in the Sports Museum, we have our hockey display. And I wanted to highlight a couple of things that are there that you would see. Breanna Taylor, the hockey goalie from Point Park, who was part of the U.S. hockey team. She won a silver medal at the U.S. Olympics. The Pittsburgh Pennies, professional hockey team for 1 year, female team, and their stories told. The masks that you see on display with the goaltender uniform in front, that's Marc-Andre Fleury's gear. The masks are from Dana Heinz of the Penguins, their equipment manager. This is his collection, which is on loan to the History Center. And these are the masks that were worn by all the goalies up until, I believe it was Tom Barrasso. And Dan McCoy, who was a sled hockey champion at the Olympics from Pittsburgh. This is the sled that he used, and his gear. Notice the sticks. If you've not seen sled hockey, usually these are in the Paralympics. Dan had cerebral palsy. Today, most of the players that are playing sled hockey competitive are veterans, and they're disabled from combat. And they play sled hockey because it gives them an outlet that they use a lot of times to help them with their PTSD. The sticks have spikes on the one end and paddles on the other, and they use them to propel themselves in their sleds, but then they use the sticks in order to control the puck and send it back and forth. And it's played very much the same as regular hockey, including the hitting. And there's a lot of hitting, and people go over and over as they knock each other over with cross checks and body checks. It's an exciting game. And in the Seoul Olympics, Dan won the gold medal in sled hockey. And on the other side of this display is a picture of him and Chris Kunitz, who played for the U.S. men's hockey team, who won the gold medal at the Olympics as well. So you see the two hockey teams, men's teams, with their gold medals from the Seoul Olympics, which is really cool, and you're not going to see anywhere else. So that's my presentation. So if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer.
We don't have anything in the chat, but if anyone does have questions, feel free to unmute yourself or type them in the chat now. Or if not, you can always email them to me later and I can get an answer for you.
Everybody muted their video, so I can't see you.
We don't have a question, but thanks for the presentation. It was really interesting.
Well, I find that we know about the hockey that we see today, but to know the history that dates all the way back to the late 1800s, I think is just fascinating. The fact that I would love to be able to see the Pittsburgh casino. They said that when that building exploded and the fire that ensued was so strong that some of the glass at Phipps Conservatory melted. So you could imagine what that was like. But to see that 12,000 people could stand on the balcony to watch a hockey match, I just found that amazing. I just wish I could see it, because you go to the library or the Phipps Conservatory, those other beautiful buildings that were built during that same time period, and some of Carnegie Mellon was built at the same time period as well. And that's where I graduated from. And those buildings are just fabulous. And to be able to, it would have been just fascinating to see the old casino and what that must have been like. Any other questions? Well, thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you walked away with at least one piece of information that you didn't know before, then I'll consider it a success.